A little introduction about who I am, how I got here to talk to you guys, and then how I became an audiobook narrator in general. I'll talk a little bit about the process of recording a book, how it works from start to finish. If there's time, maybe I'll do a little reading, and then hopefully at the end we can open it up to any questions that you guys might have. Does that sound good, Michael?
Sounds good.
Okay, so how did I get to be here? Oh, I just noticed my closet door is open. I should have closed that. Anyway, how did I get to be here? Well, I was an actor for many years. My husband and I moved to South Orange, New Jersey about 4 years ago after my son was born. And I just happened to be at the South Orange Library. And I was checking out some books for my son. And I noticed that on the shelf, right next to where I was checking out, was a series that I had narrated. And I happened to mention that to whomever was checking me out at the time, and we got to talking. And she said, "Oh, we do this series with people, and would you, be interested in coming to talk?" And I said, "Sure." So that's how I came to be here. I'm new to the group. But how did I get to be an audiobook narrator? Well, I went to the Yale School of Drama, where I finished my training in 2005. And after that, I was an actor around the country in various places, and eventually made my way to New York and did some Broadway there. And I always knew that I wanted to narrate audiobooks. It was something I had always been interested in doing. I grew up listening to audiobooks. There wasn't a lot of television in our house. And of course, back then there were probably only 4 channels you could choose from anyway, not like today. And my parents would prefer us to play or to listen. So I grew up listening to like Claire Bloom and the narration of ballets and stuff like that. And I kind of got the acting bug when I was a kid. And I remember in college, I was taking this really difficult biology class, and I used to read the textbook out loud to myself, also in different funny voices, just to keep it interesting. And so there was something going on there. Like I knew that I kind of wanted to narrate, but I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know, nobody in my family was an artist. I didn't really know that I could be an actor and make a living doing it, let alone an audiobook narrator. I didn't know how to do that or what that meant. So here I am doing my acting out in the world, and I happened to be doing, I was understudying the Broadway show, The Importance of Being Earnest, the one with Brian Bedford that the Roundabout did. This was probably in 2011. And I was understudying both young ladies, Cecily and Gwendolyn. And the young lady that was playing Cecily was British. She was here from England, and she happened to mention that she did audiobooks, that she was an audiobook narrator, and that she had been doing it for many years, and she was about to do another one. So I thought, aha, this is the person to ask. She's going to tell me everything, and she did. So I pestered her all the time, and finally she gave me the email address to some of the producers over at Audible, which is in Newark, as you might know, right around the corner from us in New Jersey. And they let me come in and audition for them. So the audition was a couple of different scripts, with dialogue and some female voices and some male voices. And I went in, and they put you in a booth, they call them whisper rooms. They put you in a vocal booth, you put your headphones on, you're there with the microphone. Usually there's a window, and through the window is an engineer or a director. It depends. And I read the script. They might have given me a little bit of direction. And then they said, "Okay, great, thanks. Don't call me, we'll call you. Bye." And I didn't know what would come of it. And I didn't know if I would hear from them again, but I did. And I started recording romances, was the first genre that I started recording, and Audible was the first company that I started working for. romances are hilarious and they are entertaining. Romances are not my typical genre, I will say, of books that I normally pick out and read for myself. And so in the beginning, it was a little, I would blush a lot in the booth having to read these very romantic scenes, um, 90% of the time with a male engineer next door listening in. But you get used to it. Romances make up a very big slice of the pie in terms of genres that are out there to be recorded. So we know people are listening to them. As much as we can joke about recording them, they sell, they're a big seller. And so it's a big part of the canon in terms of what gets picked up for narration. My first book, I should mention that I also record under a pseudonym, which a lot of narrators do when they work on a romance or when they work on a harlequin or erotica. Yes, erotica. A lot of narrators will choose to use a pseudonym, which I do. And my first book was first person British male alternating with French first person female, chapter by chapter. So, you're at the microphone and you're sitting there and you've got your deep voice on, right, for chapter 1. And then you have chapter 2 and you have to change your body language and you have to change your accent and it becomes very different, a very different story in front of the microphone, ouais? And so this was a really good introduction because it kind of made me use all my skills at once. Of course, not all books are that complicated, thank goodness. But that was my trial by fire. That was my very first book. And then I kept doing more and I really liked it. And I wanted to move out of the romance genre as much as delightful as it is. And so at that time, I was still living in Brooklyn. And I decided to build my own home studio because there are many places that have recording studios, but with modern technology and the way that files are now uploaded and sent anywhere to anyone who has a computer, home studios are really the way of the future. And we've seen this a lot in the past 5 years, 10 years, and it's just more and more and more. And we can talk about that more later. But I decided to build my own booth. So that was an adventure because I lived very close to the Atlantic Barclay Center in Brooklyn, which is a huge music venue. For those of you who know it, it's also close by to a hospital. So there were lots of police sirens, there were a lot of ambulance sounds, and I had to figure out a way to create a space that would muffle all of that noise and be completely quiet. So I hired a few people to help me and I did a lot of research online and I ended up building my own little audio booth studio in my Brooklyn closet in my 2-bedroom apartment so that I could record books at home and kind of do it on my own schedule because, of course, I was about to get married. I knew I wanted to have a family. And so the 8 shows a week was going to be out. Traveling to, California to do a show for 2 months was going to be out. So I wanted something that I could still do and use my acting talent because audiobook narration is very much acting. It's very much connecting to the reader, but not, I wouldn't want to travel all over the place. So this was my plan and that's what I started to do. And through that, I started to develop relationships with authors. I started to, develop different relationships with audiobook publishers like Recorded Books, Tantor Audio, Blackstone, Podium. These are some different audiobook publishers in the industry. They're all independent. They're all different. Some produce many different genres of work. Others produce very specific genres of work. It just depends. And then I would be hired by them and started to work more and more and more until kind of where I am today, where I don't really audition for things. An audiobook publisher will contact me directly with a title that they might have for me every once in a while, if it's a very well-known author who in their contract might get their choice of narrators. You will audition with a few different other people and they'll be able to choose who they want. But again, it differs author to author, book to book, publisher to publisher in terms of who will be narrating that title. And then you start the process. So I wish I could see more of you. I only see a couple of you, but hello again, Francis. So feel free to jump in. I would say raise your hands, but I can't see you. So I'm just going to keep going, and then I'll take a break maybe in 15 minutes to see if you guys want to ask some questions. Hopefully that sounds good with everyone.
That sounds good.
Okay. So a little bit about the process, just the nuts and bolts of like what's the process? Like, how does it go from script to audio version, right? So I know that different companies, and Michael, maybe you can speak to this later, acquire, like for a library, different titles. That works a little bit different than commercial publication. And there's also independent publication, where an author, let's say, writes a book on their own, decides that they want it produced, and they can go directly to an open forum and contact a narrator like myself, or they can have their agent contact somebody. But basically, let's say it's day one, I get an email from a publisher saying, hey, we have a title for you. What happens? Okay, so for instance, I just got a new fantasy series. So the first thing I do is obviously check the schedule. I see how long it's going to be. I figure out if I can do it, yay or nay. Then I have to read the book, right? I'm not paid to read the book, by the way. I just want to throw that in there. That is time I am not paid for. But I do read the book from beginning to end, and I make a word list that I will then talk to the author or the rights holder about, so that when I start recording, I'm obviously pronouncing everything right, which sounds very obvious and upfront. But two things about that. One is, when you're working on a fantasy, for instance, or a sci-fi, you might have planets, towns, proper names, all kinds of fantasy type names that you have no idea what the author has in their head for how they want these things pronounced. So I make a list of all of that to start. Also, a confession. So when I was first doing romances, like we talked about, they're not the hardest. They're not the most difficult to narrate in terms of names and things like that. So I got a little confident, I got a little cocky, and I was maybe doing my, fifth or sixth romance or something. And I was skimming it very quickly before I read it, just very, very quickly, very quickly, very quickly. And I didn't catch something. So I'm about 75 to 100 pages into narrating, and about on the 100th page in, it said, he said in his New York accent. And I had missed that in my initial reading. And so, of course, that's my fault. That falls on me. And I had to go back to the beginning of the book, and I had to re-record all of his dialogue so that, of course, it matched the author's intent. So boy, did I learn my lesson. So once I get through the book and I've created a list, I send that off to the author. The author gets back to me, usually with the pronunciations all in the phonetic alphabet, which, I studied in school, and it makes it easier and makes it precise. So then I've got a word list. Sometimes the word list is one page. I did a Russian young adult novel, and the word list was, 5 pages. And I did a fantasy series where it was almost 25 pages of words. It just depends. So that's kind of my key as I'm reading, that I can stop and I can look. Another thing that I do to prepare a script is I can mark it. When I first started, I would print out the whole script, the whole manuscript in pages in a PDF, and I would take my highlighter or I would take a pen and I would mark it up. These days I use a software program, right, that does the same thing. on my iPad. And when I'm reading, if it's a really complicated book, I might highlight the dialogue in different colors, or I might circle something or underline something or make notes to myself. And I call this character mapping. So if I'm given a 500-page fantasy, I know who the main characters are, and I might have a general idea of where I want to place those characters in terms of pitch or in terms of speed or tone. And then I'm making a secondary character list as I go through the book, and I'm mapping out in my mind, okay, which female characters, how am I going to do them? Because I want to try to differentiate them so that the listener has an easier time of figuring out which character is which. Same thing with my male characters. And I might make little notations about that so that when I'm starting and so that I'm reading, I have a general idea of, okay, I'm going to give this person an accent. This person's going to be in my upper register. This person's going to be in my lower register. This person might be somebody who talks really fast. This person might be someone who talks a bit slower. So it helps me to differentiate the characters that way as I go. And I hope that that is something that the listener will also appreciate and help to differentiate the characters as well. Let's see what else. So then I record it. Usually, not always, there's an engineer who's listening at the same time. So if I make a mistake, it's called punch and roll. It's kind of editing on the fly, as we call it. Usually I can press a button. It'll back me up about 2 seconds. I'll hear what I just recorded in my headphones, the last 2 seconds, and then I can keep right going with the sentence or the paragraph. Sometimes I might not catch a mistake that I made. The engineer can stop me. He'll reset the computer. He'll come into my headphones and say, oh, you said that instead of the. Okay. 2 seconds, I'll hear played back in my headphones, and I will continue to record the book. I usually record for 4 hours at a time. That's a pretty standard session. So 4 hours to 6 hours is usually how long somebody is sitting very still in a booth with their headphones on reading this book. I don't know if you've ever tried to read out loud for 30 minutes at a time, but try it. See how many mistakes you make. It's not easy. But of course, the more you do it, your brain starts to be able to fill in the sentences as you read, and it becomes a little bit easier when you do it for a living. But that said, it is a marathon and not a sprint. It takes many days and many hours. Usually you'll record for an hour, maybe you'll get up and stretch, have a quick sip of tea, maybe run to the bathroom, come back, do an hour, take maybe a 15-minute break this time, do another hour, cup of tea, another hour. So really you're trying to sit, I would say, for about an hour at a time before you get up and take breaks. The usual, this is getting into the nitty gritty, the usual ratio from time spent in the booth to per finished hour of recording, which you'll see abbreviated sometimes as PFH, and that stands for per finished hour. That means for every 2 hours you've spent at the booth or at the studio, you really come out with about 1 hour of finished audio. And finished audio is after it's been edited and proofed and sort of mastered and fancy, polished and scrunched together. So if you are recording a 13-hour book, the narrator knows, okay, that's going to take me about 26 hours, 26, 27 hours of time in the booth, not counting however many hours or days it took you to read that 500-page book. And that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of, how you're paid. You're usually paid per finished hour. You're paid by the hour. And the pay also varies based on your experience and based on which particular audio publisher you're recording for, because they are all different. They're all within about the same range, but they do vary. So let's see what else. So then you've turned it in, it goes off to an engineering team. Somebody listens to the whole thing again. They take out all your pauses, all your breath sounds. They'll mark the script if they catch a correction that perhaps the first engineer did not catch. They put in the correct spacing. So, you know, when you listen to a title, there's that nice little breath after the title or after they say chapter 1. In the land of whatever, you know, so there's usually like a 3-second pause there. So that's what the engineering team does. They put all the final finesse bells and whistles. They send it back to you one last time if there's any corrections that you need to do. Once you do those corrections, you send those back to the team, they fold those in, and then it takes about a week for Audible to put it out for sale, for production. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how I got started, how an audiobook gets recorded, and the work that goes into it. And I think we're at about 1:30. Michael, is this a good time to open it up for questions, or what do you
Sure.
think? What do people want to do now?
Sure, we can do that. I'm sure there are some good questions. This is fascinating stuff. Maybe I can start with one and then I'll open the room.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, because you're reading somebody else's words, and I'm sure as us as readers, you know, sometimes we get a book that we're just not connecting with. And at home, I know I'm rolling my eyes or saying, come on, get to the point. Do I need 5 pages on this? And I'm just wondering how you, as an audiobook reader, you don't have to get specifics, but have there been times when you're just not on the author's wavelength, and in your mind, you're
Oh,
thinking, another 3 pages on trees? Come on, just make a
yes.
decision. And
Yes,
how
of
do you handle
course.
that?
Of course. Oh my gosh, absolutely. You know, I'm not thrilled with every book that I record, right? But at the same time, I have to sit back and think, listen, this author put, whether I like it or not, this author put their time, their focus, their energy into this. And it's my job to love it as much as I can and to be the author's voice who loves it as much as I can. And so while, you know, certainly I might be frustrated with, oh my gosh, this battle scene is 27 pages, you know what I mean? But, you know, then I think, okay, well, it's my job to pretend like I love it and to really sell that, so that my feelings, yeah, don't come into it. But sure, and it's much harder to record books that you don't personally love. But I will say that, like, I've done so many books that I never would have ever picked up myself. I would have never picked these books up to read. And even certain genres, like sci-fi is not my genre. Like, I don't think I would have ever on my own decided, oh, I'd like to read this new sci-fi. No, but I found some great sci-fi books out there that I'm so happy that I was able to read and narrate, because it's opened my mind up to different genres that I normally wouldn't have picked out before. So there's that too. And then of course, you guys know, sometimes the book can be so good and the audiobook narrator just kills it. Like, it's just terrible. You can't listen. Sometimes it's the tone of their voice. Sometimes you can't tell the characters apart. Sometimes it's a little bit of an inflection that they do. Like, maybe they do this all the time and it starts to get repetitive and you feel like you're going to poke your eyes out. And then other times the book is okay, like, it's not that great, but then you have a really good narrator and you're like, wow, I can't put this down. I love listening to this. The story's not that great, but this is so good. So, you know, it certainly just depends, on the book you find and the narrator that goes with it, for sure.
Great. Well, I think I've tried to unmute everyone. Anyone wants to jump in and ask another question?
I have a kind of a comment question. First of all, I'm giving props out to Yale. My son is a Yalie, an Eli rather, a bulldog.
Nice.
Let's see. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, which I absolutely love. My daughter listens to audiobooks. I listen to it for experience because I walk a lot, so I can listen to books while I'm walking. My daughter listens to them based on how well the narrator or the reader actually reads the book. So she actually, and she's my kids in their 20s. So she actually turned me on to a series, a Diviner series, because she believed that the narrator was so incredible. And yes, the narrator was incredible because she could do like 5 or 6 different voices, and they were very consistently the same, and yet they were uniquely different. So you could differentiate who was talking based on their cadence or the the accent or the tone, etc. And because of that, I actually did listen to, I think, all 4 of the books in that series. And it wasn't a series that I would have listened to otherwise. Now, the flip side of that is when my kids were small, we always had, or younger, we always had a rule that you had to read a book before you could listen to it and read a book before you could see the movie. So we actually read all the series of Unfortunate Events books, and we started listening to them. And the first 3 are outstanding in audio form. However, they really went down when Lemony started reading them himself. And we stopped. I mean, it was just a huge turnoff because he was so awful. So what do you think makes an author believe that they can create the same magic that a professional reader can?
I hear you. I hear you. You know what? I think a lot of people, they just don't understand how difficult it is, you know? And I think if you're an author, in your head, you play all the parts, you wrote all the parts. So I think from that point of view, they often think that of course I'm going to be the best person to tell it because I know these characters super intimately. But, you know, I mean, some authors are great and some authors aren't. Like, it's just not their bag. You know, they're better at writing than sort of expressing and acting it and articulating. And so, you know, it just depends. It depends on how successful they are in terms of, are they going to be allowed to do their own work or not? But I do think that a lot of authors want to, it depends. You know, some authors, they really want to try. Some authors are mortified. They're happy to just give it to somebody else. But you're right. I mean, it can really make or break a book. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that I like about Audible is that they give you these credits. And if you are really unhappy with something that you bought to listen to or downloaded it, you can trade it in. You can write to them and say, you know what, this was not my cup of tea. I tried it. And they're usually pretty good about crediting you that and giving you a different book or giving you a credit so that you feel like it wasn't wasteful. But you know what else can hurt a series? And I've been on both sides of this, is just changing the narrator in the middle of a series, right? So you fall in love with a series. This has happened to me, and I'll tell you, I've been on both sides because I've been the narrator that's come into the series midway through that people are like, death to that narrator. She's ruined the series. It was a horrible book. I'll never, you know. But as a listener, it's happened to me too. You fall in love. These characters feel very real to you, and book 3 comes along or book 4 comes along, and suddenly it's a brand new voice. And none of the characters seem the same, you know, and it's very odd. And so that happens for different reasons. It happens just because a narrator might not want to continue doing it, or they're not available, or the author has decided they want to make a change, or whatever that is. And that's funny because it definitely happens. And that can also kind of ruin an experience for people, for sure.
Great, thank you. If no one else has a question, I do have another question. With online streaming of books and access via like public libraries, for instance, we use Libby/Overdrive at South Orange Public Library. To what extent do you think there is a competition, or is there a competition between like borrowing a audiobook from your public library, which you get for free, versus actually paying for an audiobook via service, you know, such as Amazon or, you know, Audible?
Michael, do you want to take this question? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Only to say that, I mean, I have my thoughts as a librarian, but I know that that the publishers, the way they look at it is the way that a library pays for the audiobook is different than the way any of us would pay for the audiobook on Audible or at the store. So we pay in our consortium 3 or 4 times the rate that I think the average person would spend to buy it for themselves, because the publisher thinks, again, you're buying it once, you're not going to have to replace it. And so there are little things they do to try to maximize, like you can only circulate it 26 times. And after the 26th time, you either have to purchase it again or it just disappears. So little things like that, because yeah, they want to see that they don't want people to buy one copy for whatever, $30, when you could buy one copy for $90, you get it for 2 years and then have to repurchase it. So that on my end, that's how I see it. I don't know if that's if you want to speak to that.
I don't know much about the acquisition of titles personally. That's just like a completely different department from what I do. But certainly, as with any industry, it's often about the bottom line, right? It's just about money. So I don't know. And I do know I did speak at a library conference, the ALA, many years ago, and I think I remembered learning that, you know, different libraries can access, you know, different titles, but as Michael said, it's a kind of strange roundabout way of doing things because the library system is so different than just buying it for single use.
It still does. This is Kathy. It still doesn't seem fair because to the library, because they buy one book and it lasts for 50, 60 years if, with moderate use, I guess. And if you have to buy a new audiobook every 2 years, that is getting expensive. It's a whole different model, right?
Yeah.
The publisher thinks that they came up with the number 26 as a print book will degrade after 26 circulations. You would have to replace that book anyway.
No.
Is that true?
Is
I
that
don't know.
true?
Is that, I mean, we have books that have been going on for 40 years. Other times they come back after 3 circulations, we have to replace it. So, you know,
I probably have,
26 was probably focus group somewhere, and that's what they came up with.
there are
And, you
probably
know, for
books
most
I've
books, that's
checked
okay.
out.
But yeah, for like a Harry Potter or one of these books that go out a
Yeah.
lot, you know,
Right.
yeah, it can add up.
I guess it depends on the user as well. If you have teenagers checking out the book versus having an adult who's not going to crack the spine and abuse the book. Which not all, well, but some will.
Well, I have a question that kind of jumps off what Tracy asked before. Do you have, I mean, we always have, you know, authors that we like to follow or series that we're loyal to. Do you find that there are listeners who are loyal to you that will say, oh, this is an Amanda Leigh Cobb book. This is going to be good. She narrated it.
Yeah, actually, that's just started to happen for me. And I'd say the last 5 years, really with, I think there are 2 particular series. Jane Ann Krentz is somebody that often gets published in a lot of libraries, and she does a lot of mysteries. And when I started to do her books, some of her fans kind of found me or came over to I have a Facebook page. That's kind of how I keep track of things. And then I did a very popular, a couple of fantasies lately. One by Sarah J. Maas, which is
Oh, wow.
M-A-A-S, Sarah J. Maas, and another one by Karen Marie Monning. And these are both sort of big fantasy queens in the industry, and they have an international following. And so when Sarah J. Maas is the one I came into this series as the new narrator. Oh, look out. 3rd book in. And the other one I started with. So anyway, a lot of their listeners, a lot of their fans, because they have fan groups and spin-off groups and tattoo clubs and like, you know, international crazy stuff. And so they would find me by Google and stuff. And yes, so I do have some fans that will say, hey, when are you doing your next book? Or when are you doing the next fantasy series? And sometimes they'll trade over based on something that I'm narrating. Mm-hmm.
That is so funny because I have, over COVID, I ran through a whole Sarah Maas series, and I'm a huge fan of a couple of readers, but I read her in ebook form, and it's a series that made me swear off the use of kick-ass heroin. But
was it the
but
Throne
I
of
thought-
Glass? Is it
yeah,
that?
and I thought was it that one, or I don't even remember. I just went through them so fast. I think so. And I thought this is going to be a hard one for a reader to read. She gets pretty hot, and I thought that must be interesting for the reader.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, I've done all kinds of things. As a narrator,
Have you really?
You know what I mean? You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes down in books. I mean, think about it, you know, from a romance scene to a battle scene with swords to throwing fireballs to you know, playing shrieking witches and an elven language and, you know, all kinds of stuff. But I mean, it's fun. It's fun for me. I like that kind of stuff.
I have 2. I got so excited that I have a couple of authors I want to go to Comic-Con and meet these people. Grover Gardner, I think I've read 25 or 30 of his books, and which are mostly sci-fi and fantasy, but I'm considering listening to a Civil War book that he narrated. And Steve West, who's British and who does the Queen's Thief series, is also amazing at voices. So I'm eager to try hearing your books.
Well, fingers crossed. Hey, if you don't like one, switch to another, because there's a lot out there. And of course, it depends on when I did them, right? If it's a series when I started when I was younger, I feel like I've gotten better. So maybe something in the last few years as opposed to 10 years ago.
So do we know your pseudonym to be able to follow you?
Oh, girl.
Okay, let me ask this question. Did you abandon your pseudonym when you stopped doing romance novels?
No, because I just did a romance novel that I finished last week. So I'm doing 2 books at once. I just finished a romance and I'm working on a fantasy. So I'll tell you what it is. It's Aubrey Vincent. That's my pseudonym. Aubrey, Aubrey Vincent, Vincent. And those are like the Harlequins and the romances and the really steamy stuff that like I don't want my 4-year-old knowing that mom was reading some erotica. You know what I mean?
So for the other genres, you use your real name.
Yeah, Amanda Leigh Cobb. So my married name is Amanda Salco. It's a little bit different, but yeah, you can always find me online, and Amanda Leigh Cobb is what you can plug that into Audible. Just search it or search online or my website, and anything that I've done will come up there.
We have a local author, Ruby Scalera, who writes romance novels. She's now in Tennessee, but I cannot remember her pseudonym. She doesn't use her own name either.
Yeah, I don't know Ruby, but I'd love to if that's ever figured out. That would be fun to meet her.
She's a kick.
Ruby worked here for quite some time when she was a student.
Oh, cool.
Right. Do you know her pseudonym, Michael?
Offhand, no, but I'm going to find it because I know what you're talking about.
I guess we can turn them out here in South Orange County.
There are a lot of actors out here and VO people.
I have a question that's maybe 90 degrees off of what we're talking about. You talk about doing different voices and making them distinctive, but I'm wondering how sensitive, I'm sure you are, how sensitive you are when you have a certain region or gender or ethnicity to not play into, I'm going to play up to stereotypes.
Oh, that's such a good question.
Yeah.
That's such a good question. Honestly, usually the book does a lot of that work for me, because it'll say she said in her musky tone, he said higher pitched than usual. It'll usually give you a description within it. And that's what I'll base it on. It's funny because I narrated a series called The Lumberjanes, and that's the one that the South Orange Library carries.
Neat.
And
Right.
And that, as if you're familiar with it, there it is. So it's 5 young girls in a Roanoke cabin. They're all very different. This is a very smart, very witty, very fun series. And one of the young persons is transgender, which I didn't actually know when I first started narrating that the character of Jo was transgender. But based on how she was described to me, or he was described to me, I ended up placing my voice in that kind of middle range that kind of went both ways because it seemed to make sense. And so, I usually just try to let the text dictate that. And then otherwise I just end up having to make a decision based on higher register or lower register, only to differentiate voices. Yeah.
Ruby's pseudonym is Gemma Snow.
Oh, cool. I'm going to write that down.
I think there may be 1 or 2 titles in eLibrary that we've ordered of hers, if anyone wants to read her books.
Is it Gemma with a G or with a
Yes.
J?
G.
Okay.
So Amanda, have you ever declined to read a book based on either the subject matter, the author, some philosophical or political perspective that you were uncomfortable with?
Such good questions, Tracy. Yes. There was like a BDSM type of dominant, submissive kind of romance that there was a lot of violence towards the female character, and I just did not feel comfortable doing it. I didn't like it, and I didn't want to be associated with it, so I turned it down. I have no problems with other people who read it or anybody that wanted to do it. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, and it wasn't something that I wanted to spend time on. But that's really the only one I can think of.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is all pretty new to me. Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. It's a whole profession that I didn't know. I knew it existed, but not like this. This is really wonderful to hear it from you. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's really blown up because audiobooks, people listen to them, on their daily commute, or I like to listen to them while I'm gardening or doing the laundry, these everyday menial tasks that just kind of adds an extra oomph to my day when you're just doing these other activities. I think audiobooks are so great in that way when you don't have time to sit and actually read. So if you're not into audiobooks already, I highly recommend, finding one and exploring it.
Right. May I ask you a question? Do you get royalties?
It depends. So
Yeah.
Recorded Books is the only audio publisher from whom I do get royalties. That is partly offset in the fact that they pay less hourly than the other, right? So it really all comes out in the wash. But they do, it's not royalties like big time, like if I did a commercial, like that kind of, or a movie, like television, it's small. They're small royalties. But it is a little something on the back end, but they're the only ones. Every other publisher is just by the hour, and you could sell 1 copy or 1,000,000 copies and you've made the money that you're going to make.
Amanda, I'd like to ask you kind of the classic artist question that is often asked of actors and fine artists as well. So given the fact that you are in this genre, who are your favorite readers of books?
Oh. Claire Bloom is somebody that I grew up with. I am quite partial to British accents. I don't know why, but I just love a British accent. I could listen to the phone book in a British accent. And so, like the guy that you mentioned, and gosh, they put me on the spot here. Let me think. And I know all these people by their first names, so I'm trying to think. I'm like Jim and like
Steve West, you mean?
Yes. Yes. I'd have to write them down. Like there are books that I've bookmarked that I've listened to, and I might have saved them like in a folder somewhere, but I can't think of their names offhand. But I'm happy to send you some recommendations if we do a little email exchange or anything like that, because I do have them, but I can't think of them off the top of my head.
Okay, and is there any, if you knew somebody wanted to be a reader of books, is there any preparation beyond that of being an actress and going to the Yale School of and actually having a sense of performance? Would you recommend that they do to pursue that kind of a career?
You mean somebody who's interested in it but hasn't had performing experience? Is that what you mean?
Exactly.
Well, I mean, there's a few things. Like I do some audiobook consultations online with folks all around the nation that might be interested in it. I think the idea of acting is paramount, the idea of connecting, but you can certainly have kind of technical training. In fact, I'm working with 2 students over Zoom right now who are working on their samples that they want to put out into the world on ACX so that they can start recording books. So I might talk to them about, I might give them different exercises. I might to figure out where their voice fits, what genre it's suited for, how to build up the stamina to do the hours of books, how to pick a sample that showcases their talent. And then I might work with them on the sample itself, right? Like in terms of, it's like an acting coaching session or an audiobook session where I would say, okay, visualize. I don't think you're clear on the imagery here. Let's read it again, only this time. And then you can hear the improvement. So there's like some crafting and classes that you can take, whether it's online or locally with different people who teach specifically audiobook or voiceover work.
And there you have another occupation I never thought I would learn about. The
Yes,
Right.
audiobook
book consultant. The
Yes.
pandemic I've reinvented myself.
So,
Right.
so in
Absolutely.
the realm of technical expertise, a couple questions. How much do you practice before you actually go into the studio to read it? And the second question is, once the engineers have come back with their quote unquote mastered version, but they need you to re-record something, how do you actually do that? Because they're sending it back to you, I'm assuming, in a file. Can you pause the reading in the file and then, or block out a section, or do they do that before they send it back to you?
Okay, so so two things. You asked if I practiced. I don't really practice beforehand besides prepping the book, and maybe if it's really complicated, I'll do some voices in my out loud, or I'll make a video that I can, like if I'm doing a series, I'll record the voice so that 1 year later when book 2 comes out and that character is in the same book and I have to match it from doing it a year ago and I've done 8 books since then, I can go back and do that. But I don't usually practice the book. I just kind of read it cold, so to speak, when I go in there to start doing it out loud. When you're recording, the engineer can mark the script in the WAV file for
Okay.
mistakes,
Mhm.
which is, and then so if you've made a mistake that you need to come back and re-record, what they'll often do is they'll just snip out that WAV file where the mistake was, like the sentence, and you'll get the playback of that sentence along with like a PDF next to it that says what the mistake was. So
Mhm.
you said this instead of that, and then you'll hear the sentence, just it's clipped out in an MP3. So you can play the MP3. Oh, that's where I was in the book. That's the tone or the momentum. That's the sound. And then there's the mistake. So you can try to match it, and then they can just snip it back into the waveform.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
We still have a few minutes if there are any other extra questions.
About how many books do you read a year?
Again, it varies. Sometimes I can get 3 books and sometimes I can go 3 months without a title. So I would say 10 to 15, maybe like a book a month, kind of.
Mhm.
It just depends. Yeah. And of course it depends on the length of the book, right? Because some book takes a book might take 4 days and another book might take 16 days. So it varies on the length also, but there are dry spells and then spells where you've got books coming out of your ears basically.
And have you found, how old is you have a son? Is it a son?
Yeah, he's 4.
He's 4. Okay, so does he read hardcover books as well as listen to audiobooks?
He's we're teaching him how to read right now, so he's
Mhm.
just at that beginning stage of recognizing small words, so he's not reading yet. But I will put on, it's more songs actually, and sometimes an audiobook, like a good children's story. I'll put
Mhm.
the Gruffalo, or like there's these little ones, and he'll listen to books too. Just like I did, a little less TV, a little more imagination for him.
Yeah, and to your point, when you're reading out loud,
Mhm.
my son and I used to do partner reads, so we would read, he would read a couple pages and I would read a couple pages, and we're reading together. Not to be confused with competition read, that's something else we did too. But we were together when we did this partner reading. And honestly, after about 4 pages, I'm about to fall asleep. Because it's always night, at bedtime. And he reads his 4 pages, and then I'm like, okay, now it's my turn. Then he's like nudging me, mom.
I feel your pain.
Yes, I can't imagine reading for 4 hours or an hour at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Not just reading it, but having to convince the listener that they're having experience as a result of an immersion into this book. So I can only imagine how difficult it is for you to do that in a 4-hour session. It just seems like it would be so challenging.
It is. It's really, it's really hard.
Yeah, because you're on your own, and versus like in a play where other people have lines, and your lines, there's the element of interaction. You're on stage, you're off stage, you're on the entire time.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're the narrator and you're everybody. It is hard. In fact, this week has been especially difficult. And I had to say the other night, Mama can't read you a story tonight. I mean, my voice was, I had my hot tea. I was like, I'm done. Like Daddy's reading stories this week because mommy's voice is hurting. just because of overuse. So yeah, I mean, that definitely happens. It's hard. And that's why I don't do sessions over 4 hours. I simply can't. I start to fall apart. My voice needs rest. I start to make more mistakes because you have to be so focused while you're doing it. So yeah, it's not easy.
And kind of along that line, what do you do to protect your voice and your vocal cords?
Well, the best thing is rest. And so a good night's sleep and sometimes going on vocal rest, which of course with a 4-year-old is basically impossible. But that's the best thing you can do. And then next to that is hydration. So you're just drinking as much water as you can, as much tea as you can. There's little tricks like, tea and honey and stuff like that. But really it's about rest and hydration. I run a humidifier year round all over the house because that really helps me to stay hydrated for my cords, especially in the winter. But I found that I kind of need to do it full time. And that's basically it. Hydration, rest, and as much humidity in the air as possible. Of course, don't go to it's COVID now, but don't go to a basketball game and yell your brains out. Don't go to a loud bar or a loud restaurant and try to have a conversation because,
or your favorite concert with your favorite band, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to keep that in mind. Yeah.
Wow. Kudos to you. Kudos to you because I know you brought this across so beautifully.
Oh,
and
thank you.
yeah. So you have me wanting to go to the library to get something that you have done. Yes.
Aw,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
what else you got there, Michael? Besides,
I just pulled these Lumberjanes books, but I'll have to pull a little collection together.
Okay. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you in South Orange in your
thank
walk.
you. Yeah, if you ever see me out and about, please say hello.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yes.
On behalf of Phyllis, who I know wanted to be here, I thank you for coming. It was a great discussion. And to everyone who's listening, I just wanted to say that I noticed that we've just come up on 1 year since we started these special conversations on Friday afternoons. It was April, I think, 18th of last year. So I'm happy to see that a lot of people are still coming. And if you're not able to make any of
Happy
these,
anniversary.
yes, I do put them up on YouTube, usually the next week. So you could watch pretty much all of the ones from the last year. And again, I thank you for coming. Thank you, Amanda. And have a good week, everyone.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Reach out to me anytime. My website is just my name, www.amandaleigcobb.com. You can message me on there. You can say hello. But it was really nice to meet you. And I hope I see you in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you.